Mr Mischief by Roger Hargreaves. Poor Mr Happy had had a tiring day. Rushing here and there and back again, cheering people up, was hard work. Phew, he sighed as he went into his house and sat down for a well-earned rest on a kitchen chair. But then, do you know what happened? It fell to bits. Bump! Went poor Mr Happy. That's all I need, he said. I rather think that I have had a visit from Mr Mischief. He was right. Outside Mr Happy's house, and running away as fast as his little legs would carry him, was a small mischievous figure. Mr Mischief. "Oh, mischief! Glorious mischief!" he cried. "I do so love it!" And he ran, giggling, into the night. The next morning there was a knock at Mr Greedy's front door, but when he went to answer it, there was no one there. But what was there was a box, and inside the box was a large chocolate cake filled with cream and with a most delicious-looking pink icing. Mr Greedy's eyes gleamed. He licked his lips and shut his eyes and opened his mouth and took a large bite. Ugh! The chocolate wasn't chocolate, it was mud. The cream inside wasn't cream, it was cotton wool. And that delicious-looking pink icing wasn't icing at all, it was toothpaste. And outside Mr Greedy's house, and running away as fast as his little legs would carry him, was a small mischievous figure, giggling as he ran. That's not all. That very same morning Mr Funny discovered that someone had filled his hat with treacle. Very sticky treacle. Can you guess who that someone might have been? However, that very same afternoon Mr Mischief did something that he was to regret. He was walking along through the woods, looking for mischief, when he came across a wizard. A fast-asleep wizard. "I know," giggled Mr Mischief. "I'll change the wizard's wand for an ordinary piece of wood, and then he can't do any magic." He grinned a mischievous grin and crept quietly towards the slumbering wizard. Mr Mischief reached carefully out and seized the wizard's magic wand. But what he didn't know was that wizards' wands don't like to be seized. "Help!" shrieked the wand in a high, shrill voice, and awakened the wizard, who in turn seized Mr Mischief by his nose, which was extremely painful. "Let go of my nose!" cried Mr Mischief. "I know who you are," said the wizard. "You're that Mr Mischief who sawed through poor Mr Happy's chair legs, and," he continued, "baked a rather unusual cake for poor Mr Greedy, and," he went on, "put treacle in poor Mr Funny's hat. I've been hearing all about you," he added. "Let go of my nose!" cried Mr Mischief again. "Very well," said the wizard, "but don't believe that you can get away with being as mischievous as that." And as he let go of Mr Mischief's nose, he got hold of his magic wand and waved it. "Beware!" he said, and went off. "Silly wizard," muttered Mr Mischief. "Can't you take a joke?" And he went home. "Silly wizard," he said again, and he sat down in his kitchen. Bump! "Silly, silly, silly wizard," groaned Mr Mischief, picking himself up. "Him and his silly magic." And he made himself some porridge for tea. Smiled Mr Mischief as he put a large spoonful of porridge into his mouth. "Ugh!" Somehow, as if by magic, which of course it was, the porridge had turned into sawdust. "Oh dear," spluttered Mr Mischief. "Perhaps I had better not get up to quite so much mischief in future after all." And he went upstairs. He jumped into bed. Splosh! The bed was full of raspberry jam. Ugh! "Oh dear, oh dear," sighed Mr Mischief. "I think I definitely must not get up to quite so much mischief in future." And you know something? The day after he was as good as gold, and the next day, and the day after that. It lasted a week. And then that old mischievous urge got the better of him. He just couldn't help himself. It was a Saturday night. He crept into Mr Fussy's house when he was fast asleep. And can you guess what he did? "Oh, what a beautiful piece of perfect mischief!" he cried, and he ran giggling home. He'd cut off half Mr Fussy's moustache. Isn't that terrible? Poor Mr Fussy. He was absolutely horrified when he awoke and found out. But even that terrible piece of mischief is not the end of Mr Mischief's story. So, before you read this last page, just take a look out of the window. Go on. You can't see a small mischievous figure anywhere about, can you? Are you sure?